Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here.
If you're joining us today, you're likely looking for that ultimate shortcut, right? A way to understand the deeper mechanics of governance.
Exactly.
You want to look past the daily headlines and, understand the actual structural rules that dictate how power is wielded or delayed or just entirely derailed.
And do it all without that heavy feeling of information overload.
Right. Which brings us to our mission for today's Deep Dive. We are focusing on a single, massive source document.
A really fascinating one.
Yeah. It is the comprehensive Wikipedia article on the filibuster.
So to give you a clear definition before we get into the weeds, a filibuster is essentially a parliamentary procedure. It's where members of a legislature prolong debate to delay or entirely prevent a decision from being made.
Often called talking a bill to death.
Right. And since you, our listener, likely already know the basic concept of the stall tactic, we're bypassing the dictionary stuff today. We are looking at the actual procedural mechanics, how this evolved from a simple Roman loophole into a highly sophisticated modern bureaucratic weapon.
But before we get into that historical evolution, we need to establish a really clear boundary for our discussion.
Yes, it's very important.
Because this topic inherently touches on the raw nerves of global governance.
That impartiality is crucial because our source material covers highly politically charged events.
From all over the place.
Exactly. Events involving both left-wing and right-wing political parties worldwide. So we want to explicitly state to you, the listener, that we are impartially reporting the facts exactly as they are laid out in the source.
We're not taking any political sides here.
No. We're not endorsing any of the viewpoints or policies of the parties we'll discuss. Our sole focus is to impartially analyze the mechanics, the history, and, really, the sheer audacity of legislative obstruction.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because I'm curious how a word that sounds like, I don't know, a maneuver for a pirate ship
It does.
ended up defining complex parliamentary procedure. How did that conceptual leap happen?
Well, the linguistic journey is surprisingly literal. The term ultimately derives from the Dutch word vrybuiter.
Vrybuiter.
Yeah, which translates to freebooter.
Oh, wow.
So we are literally talking about pillaging, plundering, adventurers.
Actual pirates.
Factual pirates. And by the late 18th century, it was reborrowed into English from the French form, which was flibustier.
Okay.
And then moving into the mid-19th century, it took on the Spanish form, filibustero.
Which sounds a lot closer to what we use today.
It does. At that time, it was applied to American adventurers, guys like a man named William Walker.
What was he doing?
They were organizing these private, unauthorized military expeditions to just take over Latin American countries.
That is wild.
It's crazy history. And it wasn't until the mid to late 19th century that filibustering became common in American English to describe the act of obstructing progress in a legislative assembly.
So taking over a country shifted to taking over a legislature.
What's fascinating here is the conceptual continuity.
Yeah.
The word kept its core meaning of hijacking, or taking something hostage. Instead of hijacking a ship or a sovereign territory, these politicians were hijacking the legislative process itself.
So the terminology is strictly 19th century. But the tactic of hijacking the rules?
Oh, that is ancient.
Right, because the source material takes us all the way back to the Roman Republic.
Yeah.
Specifically to Cato the Younger.
Cato is a legendary figure for this.
He essentially weaponized the clock.
He did. Cato weaponized a very specific rule of the Roman Senate, and that rule was that all official business had to conclude by dusk.
Which seems like a rule just begging to be exploited.
It was a brilliant, if highly cynical, exploitation of procedural norms. If there was a measure Cato despised, he didn't even need a majority vote to defeat it.
He just had to stand up.
He would just stand up and speak continuously until the sun went down.
Wow.
Once dusk hit, the rules mandated the session end, and the measure was effectively blocked for the day. And his most frequent target for this tactic was none other than Julius Caesar.
The clash between them in 60 BCE is incredible. It really highlights how a procedural stall can force massive political concessions.
It's a great example.
So picture this. Caesar is returning from a highly successful military campaign in Hispania. He's been awarded a triumph.
Which is the ultimate Roman military parade. A massive honor.
Right, but he also wants to run for consul, the highest elected office.
The peak of Roman political life.
Exactly. But the catch is that Roman law requires candidates to appear in the forum in person to declare their candidacy. However...
And this is the trap.
Right. If a general crosses the city boundary before his triumph, he legally forfeits the parade.
So Caesar recognized this catch-22 immediately. He petitioned the Senate to grant him a special dispensation to run in absentia.
So he wouldn't have to cross the boundary.
Right. This would allow him to keep his military glory and pursue political power at the same time. But Cato recognized the threat Caesar posed to the Republic's balance of power.
So Cato decides to intervene.
Exactly. He used his filibuster tactic. He took the floor and spoke continuously until sunset.
Ran out the clock.
By running out the clock, Cato completely blocked the proposal from ever coming to a vote. Caesar was forced to make a bitter choice.
He had to pick one.
He ultimately chose power over glory. He forfeited his military triumph, crossed into the city as a private citizen, and ran for the consulship.
Which he won. Because a year later, in 59 BCE, Caesar actually is consul. And he tries to pass a major land reform bill.
And Cato is right there waiting.
Cato sticks to his playbook. He stands up and initiates another one of his marathon speeches. But Caesar, now holding actual executive power, decides to escalate the conflict.
Because Caesar realized he was running out of time, he needed to pass the bill before the end of the month. That's when his co-consul would take over the primary administrative duties.
So he's desperate.
Frustrated by the stalling, Caesar ordered his guards, the lictors, to physically drag Cato off the Senate floor.
Just drag him right out.
And throw him in jail for the rest of the day.
Look, that just seems like a massive miscalculation. You can't just imprison your political opposition without severe fallout.
It was a massive breach of decorum. The other senators were absolutely outraged by this authoritarian display.
Naturally.
Realizing he had alienated the very body he needed to govern, Caesar ordered Cato released. The entire day was wasted anyway. The Senate never got to vote. And Caesar ultimately had to bypass the Senate entirely to get his law passed through the tribal assembly.
It perfectly demonstrates that using the rules against your opponents is as old as the rules themselves.
Very true.
But circumventing those rules by force usually backfires.
It almost always does.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. When you think of a filibuster today, you usually picture the sheer physical endurance required.
Yes, the talking filibuster.
It's not just a political maneuver. It's an extreme test of human biology.
Because to execute a speaking filibuster correctly in many systems, the rules are unforgiving. You cannot sit down, you cannot stop talking, you cannot lean on your desk.
And you certainly cannot leave the chamber for a bathroom break.
No bathroom breaks.
The 1977 Texas State Senate filibuster by Senator Bill Meyer is a perfect study in this kind of physical extremity.
A legendary effort.
He was trying to delay a bill regarding the publication of workplace injury claims, and to do so, he spoke for 43 straight hours.
And the Texas Senate rules are notoriously brutal. They employ a strict 3-strike rule.
3 strikes.
Yeah. A senator must stay entirely on the specific topic of the bill. If they veer off topic, or if their voice drops so low they can't be heard, they receive a strike.
That's intense.
3 strikes, and the floor is forcibly yielded.
Enduring that kind of mental focus for 43 hours while standing is staggering enough. But the biological reality of almost 2 days without a bathroom break?
That requires preparation.
A level of preparation that borders on the absurd.
Senator Meyer was highly prepared. To manage his bodily functions without leaving the floor, he wore an astronaut bag under his clothing.
An astronaut bag?
Yes. The parliamentary rules allowed him exactly one highly regulated opportunity to step into a nearby anteroom.
But he still had to be present.
He had to keep one foot on the Senate floor or remain visible to manage this equipment without technically yielding the floor.
The dedication is almost terrifying.
It is.
But Meyer had the luxury of preparation. The source material outlines a scenario in the Philippines in 1963 that turned into an absolute nightmare.
Oh, the Rosseller Lim case?
Yes. Senator Rosseller Lim was trying to block Ferdinand Marcos from becoming the president of the Senate. Lim's party, the Nacionalistas, controlled exactly half the chamber.
A perfect tie.
Right. And they were waiting for their crucial tie-breaking vote. A man named Alejandro Almendras.
Who was flying in from the United States.
Exactly. So Lim's objective was straightforward but grueling. Hold the floor and prevent a vote until Almendras walked through the doors.
Lim stood at the podium for over 18 hours.
18 hours.
And unlike Meyer, Lim had no special equipment. And he was strictly prohibited from leaving the podium to use the restroom.
The source notes that Lim actually had to relieve himself in his pants while continuing to speak.
Just brutal.
By the time Almendras finally arrived, Lim was so physically depleted that he cast his vote for his party's candidate and immediately collapsed.
He had to be carried out of the session hall on a stretcher.
But the profound tragedy of Lim's 18-hour ordeal is the outcome.
Yes. After enduring that level of public humiliation and physical suffering, Almendros arrived, took his seat, and cast his vote for Ferdinand Marcos anyway.
He flipped.
He did. Marcos took control of the Senate, rendering Lim's physical collapse completely futile.
It's a brutal reminder that a filibuster only delays the inevitable if you don't actually have the votes.
Exactly. It's a stall, not a veto.
We also see these incredible endurance tests in Europe. In Austria, back in 1897, a delegate named Otto Lecher spoke continuously for 12 hours.
To block the renewal of the Ausgleich.
Right.
The Ausgleich was the crucial constitutional compromise that regulated the dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary. Its renewal was highly contentious.
But what's wild is who was watching?
Yes. The famous American author Mark Twain was living in Vienna at the time, and he was actually in the gallery watching Lecher's 12-hour speech.
That's a great historical crossover.
Twain was so captivated by the parliamentary chaos that he wrote a famous essay about it titled Stirring Times in Austria.
And Lecher's record held for over a century, until Werner Kogler of the Austrian Green Party spoke for 12 hours and 42 minutes in 2010 to protest a budget measure,
breaking the record by under an hour.
But while the sheer physical toll of these endurance runs is staggering, human biology is ultimately a limiting factor.
You can only stand for so long.
Right. So to get around needing a stretcher, modern politicians realized they could let paper do the heavy lifting.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what we see here is an evolutionary arms race.
An arms race of obstruction.
Precisely. As legislatures implemented stricter rules to stop physical endurance filibusters, politicians adapted. They shifted from physical warfare to bureaucratic warfare.
Which means using the rules against themselves.
Yes. This is where opposition parties use the amendment process to completely clog the gears of government.
The provincial legislature in Ontario, Canada, provides a masterclass in this evolution. In 1991, the opposition wanted to derail the government's budget.
So instead of giving a marathon speech, they introduced Bill 95, officially titled the Zebra Mussel Act.
The vulnerability they exploited was a simple parliamentary rule. When a bill is introduced, the proposing member has to read the title aloud.
And then the clerk of the chamber is obligated to read the title aloud as well.
Right. So the opposition packed the title of the Zebra Mussel Act with the name of every single lake, river, and stream in the entire province of Ontario.
It's brilliant in a twisted way. By making the title a geographic encyclopedia, they occupied the entirety of the day's session just reading water names.
It's a clever hack. But in 1997, Ontario saw what happens when you combine bureaucratic warfare with early computer technology.
The Megacity Bill.
Yes. The government was attempting to pass a bill to merge several municipalities into the Megacity of Toronto. The opposition New Democratic Party fought back using mail merge software.
Mail merge. They used that software to generate 11,500 individual amendments to the bill.
Over 11,000.
Each of those 11,500 amendments was identical in its wording, exactly 220 words long, except for one single detail.
One word changed.
Each amendment named a different specific street in the proposed megacity, demanding that public hearings be held with the residents of that particular street.
So the legislature was forced into around-the-clock sessions just to process the sheer volume of paper.
And that exhaustion led to a massive unforced error.
This is my favorite part.
On April 4th, the sleepy government members accidentally voted to pass one of the NDP amendments.
Just hit the wrong button.
Suddenly, the residents living on a tiny street called Caffon Court in Etobicoke were legally granted their own exclusive public consultation on the Megacity Bill.
Just that one street.
The government had to scramble to draft and pass a new amendment just to nullify their own mistake.
One mess.
Eventually, the Speaker of the House intervened, ruling that the clerk didn't have to read the identical 220 words every single time. They could just read the street name.
But even with that procedural shortcut, it still took them days of continuous voting just to reach the letter Z and vote on Zora Street.
And that's 11,000 amendments. But when we look at the French Parliament in 2006, the scale becomes almost incomprehensible.
The left-wing opposition was fighting the privatization of Gaz de France.
They submitted 137,449 amendments.
Over 130,000.
To put that in perspective, If the French Parliament had followed normal procedure and voted on each of those amendments, it would have taken them 10 consecutive years just to clear the queue.
10 years of voting.
Yes.
And Hong Kong pushed the numbers even further in 2013.
They did.
A lawmaker attempted to pass a rule limiting members to moving only one motion, specifically to ban filibustering.
And the pro-democracy camp responded to this ban on filibustering with the largest filibuster imaginable.
How many amendments?
They submitted 1.9 million amendments.
1.9 million.
The Legislative Secretariat estimated that just verifying the accuracy of these motions would take 408 man-months of labor.
So if you handed this to a single clerk,
they would be reading these amendments every single day for the next 34 years.
34 years. It's essentially a denial of service attack, a DOS attack, but executed entirely with paper and parliamentary procedure.
Exactly.
We also see incredible creativity in how these rules are exploited internationally. In the UK, in 2012, politicians were trying to block a bill that would put the UK on Central European time.
So Conservative MP Jacob Rees-Mogg proposed an amendment that would give the single county of Somerset its own independent time zone, set exactly 15 minutes behind London.
Just pure absurdity to waste time.
Yes. And in Ireland in 2014, Justice Minister Alan Shatter utilized a speaking tone so monotonous and deliberately unengaging that the press officially dubbed his filibuster the drone attack.
The drone attack. I love that.
It was highly effective.
Then there's New Zealand in 2009. Lawmakers opposed a bill reorganizing the Auckland local government. They flooded the floor with amendments, like proposing to rename the body the Auckland Catch a Fire Council.
But their most effective tactic was linguistic.
Right.
They deliberately cast all their oral votes in Maori. By doing so, they legally forced parliamentary translators to translate every single vote into English for the official record.
Just drastically slowing down the voting process.
Weaponizing the translation requirements.
And just recently, in December 2025, Lithuania saw its first ever parliamentary filibuster.
Over a bill regarding the national radio and television head.
The opposition submitted hundreds of satirical proposals, including a literal cat amendment.
And they successfully stalled the vote until January 2026, aided by the unexpected hospitalization of the committee chair, which threw the already delayed schedule into complete disarray, which brings up a distinct, highly strategic category of obstruction.
Okay.
Sometimes the filibuster isn't about blocking a bill indefinitely or drowning the opposition in paper. It's simply a surgical tool for clock management.
Clock management.
You are buying time until a specific external event occurs.
We see a clear example of this in Chile in 1993. Deputy Jorge Ulloa spoke for 6 hours for one simple reason. He needed to keep the session open until his colleague could physically travel from the city of Conception to the chamber.
To cast a crucial vote on impeaching 3 Supreme Court justices.
Exactly. But the ultimate clock management operation happened in Chile in 2021.
The stakes were incredibly high. The chamber was debating the impeachment of President Sebastián Piñera. The opposition needed every single vote to reach the necessary threshold.
But there was a massive problem.
2 of their key lawmakers, Georgia Jackson and Gonzalo Winter, were stuck at home under a mandatory COVID-19 quarantine.
The tension here is palpable, because the quarantine legally expired at the exact stroke of midnight. If the debate ended before midnight, the vote would fail.
So, Deputy Jaime Naranjo took the floor. His sole objective was to keep the debate open until the clock struck 12.
Just stalling for midnight.
He spoke for nearly 15 hours straight, meticulously managing his time. The moment midnight arrived, the quarantine expired. Jackson and Winter rushed to the Congress building, took their seats, and their votes provided the exact margin needed to successfully impeach the president.
It's procedural brinkmanship at its finest. Federal politics in Canada saw a similar time-buying strategy in 2011. The Conservative government was pushing a back-to-work bill for locked-out Canada Post workers.
And the opposition NDP fiercely disagreed.
But rather than relying on one person to speak for 15 hours, 103 NDP members of parliament executed a highly coordinated 58-hour tag team filibuster.
Passing the baton.
Yeah. They rotated in 20-minute shifts, passing the floor back and forth to keep the government awake and delayed for days.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean? How does this historical and international context apply to the modern governance we see in the news, particularly regarding the United States Senate?
Well, the United States Senate is arguably the most famous modern battleground for this tactic. Its defenders affectionately call the filibuster the soul of the Senate.
Right.
In the U.S. system, any senator can speak for as long as they want on any topic. To force an end to the debate, the Senate must invoke a rule called cloture, and cloture typically requires a supermajority, 60 out of the 100 senators.
And because securing 60 votes in a highly polarized environment is incredibly difficult, the entire culture of the Senate has shifted. The evolutionary arms race we talked about has reached a point where you don't even need to put on an astronaut bag and stand there for 43 hours.
Today, the mere threat of a filibuster is usually enough. If the majority leader knows they don't have the 60 votes required to invoke cloture, they often won't even bring the bill to the floor for a vote.
It effectively means that almost all major legislation in the United States requires a 60-vote supermajority to pass, rather than a simple 51-vote majority.
But political majorities rarely tolerate gridlock indefinitely. They found a procedural loophole, a highly controversial maneuver known as the nuclear option.
The nuclear option.
The nuclear option is a parliamentary maneuver where a simple majority of the Senate votes to change the rules of the chamber, effectively bypassing that 60-vote threshold for specific types of votes.
And to maintain our strict impartiality regarding U.S. politics, it's essential to note that both major political parties have utilized this tactic to achieve their goals.
Exactly. In 2013, the Democratic-controlled Senate used the nuclear option to lower the cloture threshold to a simple majority for executive branch nominees and lower court judicial nominees.
Subsequently, in 2017, the Republican-controlled Senate expanded the use of the nuclear option, lowering the threshold to a simple majority for Supreme Court nominees.
And the push to expand it continues. In 2022, the Democrats attempted to use the nuclear option again, this time aiming to lower the threshold for actual legislation.
However, that attempt failed because two Democratic senators, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, broke ranks and voted to maintain the 60-vote rule, preserving the legislative filibuster.
The tension surrounding this rule leads to incredible spectacles, even recently. In April of 2025, Senator Cory Booker set a new historical milestone,
delivering a speech on the Senate floor that lasted 25 hours and 5 minutes.
He surpassed the famous record set by Strom Thurmond, who filibustered the 1957 Civil Rights Act.
But it's important to clarify, based on the source material, that while Booker's 25-hour marathon was a feat of endurance, it wasn't officially categorized as a filibuster.
Procedurally, there was no actual vote on a specific bill being delayed or blocked at that moment.
It was an endurance speech, but technically a different procedural beast.
That distinction is key, and we even see variations in the U.S. House of Representatives.
The House is much larger than the Senate and therefore operates under extremely strict time limits for debate.
However, party leaders have access to a loophole known as the magic minute, allowing them to speak for as long as they wish.
Just this year, Hakeem Jeffries utilized this rule to speak for 8 hours and 44 minutes in opposition to the One Big Beautiful Bill Act,
utilizing the few procedural tools available to the minority in that chamber. This raises an important question for you, the listener, to ponder as we wrap up. When we look at all these examples, from Roman jails to astronaut bags to millions of mail-merged amendments, we're observing the core structural tension of democracy. How does a system perfectly balance the minority's absolute right to be heard and register their dissent with the majority's mandate to actually govern and pass laws?
It is the ultimate systemic tightrope walk.
Okay.
And I want to leave you with a concept to chew on as you go about your day.
Okay.
We spent this entire deep dive looking at how exhausting, absurd, and completely inefficient the filibuster is. But what if that extreme theatrical absurdity is actually a hidden safety valve for democracy?
A safety valve.
Think about it. By giving a passionate political minority a mechanism to fight tooth and nail, to scream, to read geographic dictionaries, to stall the system for days without resorting to actual physical violence, does the filibuster serve a deeper purpose? Does the sheer exhausting theater of talking a bill to death keep societies from tearing themselves apart in the streets?
It's a fascinating lens through which to view legislative gridlock, a vital perspective on the realities of power.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We look forward to unpacking more of these systemic mechanics with you next time.